Picasso's Secret. Let's explore the minds of Pablo Picasso and some Upper Paleolithic cave artists, where we will learn about some of Picasso's most closely held secrets that he carried to his grave. We begin our journey of artistic rediscovery with Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon from 1907. This large oil painting, which was entitled on its release, now hangs in New York City's Museum of Modern Art. The image is considered the first modern art painting, as British art critic Alistair Sooke describes, the rupture moment of the art from the past and the art of the future. Les Demoiselles d'Avignon was controversial for its time. One of Picasso's friends remarked, "One day we shall find Pablo has hanged himself behind his great canvas." What is most striking about this painting are the masks on the woman to the viewer's right. We can learn something about the masks by looking at Picasso's studies. Note that the two women do not have masks from the conception of this work. Something happened after this study. Most art history scholars maintain that the mask on the upper character resembles African art. Picasso was known to have seen African statues about this time in his life. The apparent mask on the lower crouching character bears little resemblance to African mask and has made the African inspiration more argumentative than conclusive. This page from Wikipedia designates Les Demoiselles d'Avignon to have been painted in his African period. Picasso's Negro period and Black period are also used to describe this phase. You may have seen a dramatic account of Picasso's alleged inspiration for these masks in the 2017 National Geographic Genius Picasso series starring Antonio Banderas. In this series, Picasso enters a room, perhaps in a museum, and is influenced by the mask visions before him. This account of Picasso's inspiration is unsupported. Picasso's photographer, Brossi, said, "The birth of cubism owed nothing to African fetishes he himself had seen. African sculptures came only after he had completed the canvas. It is partly coincidental that what has wrongly been called his Negro period corresponded to the time when he discovered African statues and masks." When asked, "Were you yourself directly influenced by Negro art, as people often claimed?" Picasso responded, "No, definitely not, but the discovery of their sculpture coincided at the same time with the kind of thing we were searching for." One direction to ascertain the origin of the masks comes from Picasso's friend Max Jacob, who noted, "Picasso started some large figures, with noses attached to the eyes. He became absorbed in a profound meditation, simplifying animals and things, and arriving at a single stroke at drawings of a sort that recall prehistoric cave paintings." Picasso had a lot of friends. He was fun to be around and liked to party. As such, we have many documented quotes from them. The belief that the masks have African origins is not entirely unreasonable. Here we can compare a study of a mask from Les Demoiselles d'Avignon with a Fang mask now in the Louvre. My perspective on the origins of the apparent masks in Les Demoiselles d'Avignon is similar to Jacob. We can see almost identical characters in a chamber at the Spanish cave of Altamira. The cave artists used charcoal to accentuate natural irregularities in the rock so as to represent heads, possibly those of female horses, which may have been transferred to Les Demoiselles d'Avignon in a metaphorical context. This interpretation may make me an art history rebel. I believe Picasso would have appreciated this counter perspective. The Altamira cave was rediscovered in 1868. The site is more famous for the bison-painted ceiling called the Great Hall of Polychromes. The cave's first excavation by the Spanish amateur archaeologist Marcelino de Sautula, was dramatized in the 2016 movie Finding Altamira, featuring Antonio Banderas. Picasso was born in 1881. He was 7 years old when Altamira was first excavated. Picasso could have been directly exposed to these cave images. Finding Altamira closes with two quotes that are proposed to be from Picasso. After Altamira, all is decadence, that he was alleged to have said after being asked to investigate the authenticity of the Altamira cave art in the early 1900s. And we have invented nothing, which Picasso was reported to have said after he left the French cave of Lascaux in the 1940s. The Altamira images pictured here are contained in the Wendel collection at the Neanderthal Museum in Germany. They were photographed by the German theatrical designer Heinrich Wendel, who lived from 1915 to 1980. Thereby, they were photographed after the painting of Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Picasso had a different source. Picasso's words may give us some clues to the origins of the masks in Les Demoiselles d'Avignon and where art came from. The Spanish artist was quoted as saying, "It occurred to man to create his own images. It's because he discovered them in the world around him, almost formed, already within his grasp. He saw them in a bone, in the irregular surfaces of caved walls, in a piece of wood. One form might suggest a woman, another a bison." Picasso's introspective commentary speaks to the Altamira masks. Picasso is speaking to the pareidolia phenomenon that allows us to see faces in the rocks, animals in the clouds, and peopled constellations in the night sky that are not physically there. The Altamira masks are pareidolia that the Ice Age artist enhanced. This ability is apparently unique to human beings, although some people have lost this ability through the occurrence of strokes. There was a time in our past when we were like chimpanzee. In this time, our brains were wired differently, and none of us were able to peer into rock faces, gaze at the clouds, and look up at the night sky to find meaning in what is not there. I first noticed these Upper Paleolithic characters in the French anthropologist André Leroy-Gorin's 1960 book, Treasures of Prehistoric Art. Gorin's images do not have the flash shadows around the central character, which Picasso found to be hair. These images were not Picasso's source. Note that there are 3 masks from Altamira in Gorin's book. Picasso borrowed the 3rd character for his 1939 painting, Night Fishing at Antibes. We have another case of Picasso's artistic borrowing in his 1936 painting, Curtain Design for Armand Roland's play, Les Fortunes Juliette. This avianoid character is not wearing a mask. The beak on this curtain design avianoid bears no resemblance to any bird, whereas the Birdman character on the Agnus Dei panel in the French Grotte de Père is wearing a vulture mask. Picasso did not carry that identifiable bird relationship forward in his painting, although he did maintain the long beak, strong breast, large fingers, and odd feet. We can compare the original panel to my outline mask Birdman character. The mask is most representative of a griffon vulture. Wing bones from this bird were fabricated into early flutes dating to 43,000 years ago in southwest Germany. There may be a ritual connection between the masked Birdman character and flutes. We can also compare the original panel to a drawing by the French archaeologist Abbé Henri Breuil, and from whom prehistory was once decided. The abbé appears to have missed a few lines. Note that the masked Birdman shamanic character merges with the lower horse, becoming what the ancient Greeks would have interpreted as a centaur. All of these characters were embedded by the cave artists. We continue this tradition of embedded characters and images to the present with hidden animal tests, such as this one. How many animals can you count? You may have seen such a test on the flip side of a kid's menu where animals are hidden in a forest or jungle. Psychologists have a formal test called an embedded figures test to determine who has this talent. The American artist Bev Doolittle employs this embedded figures technique. How many horses can you count? We return now to an embedded horse that Picasso appears to have borrowed from the French Gros de Père for his Guernica. The painting Guernica is Picasso's statement about the bombing of the named civilian town on April 26, 1937, during the Spanish Civil War. Picasso said of the painting, "In the panel I shall call Guernica, I clearly express my abhorrence of the military caste which has sunk Spain in an ocean of pain and death." The horse in Guernica has been a curiosity with previous uncertainty as to its origin. Picasso left us sketches to see his progression of characters. Here we can see his many horses, none of which look like the final equine in Guernica. Between the first and final states of Guernica, there is a substitution of the central horse to one reaching its head back. Picasso substitutes the fallen hero and adds a light bulb in the center when there is already a lamp bearer, among many other changes. Are there two or more superimposed scenes from different ages represented by these two different types of light? There are also now overlapping characters, such as the bull and upper horse on the viewer's top left. The changes between these two states also overlap with a missing week from Picasso's life. Where did Picasso go? What did he see that inspired the changes? Here we can see the overlapping of the bull and upper horse. Note that the ear of a bull is not upright. Picasso does it again with his still life with candle, palette, and black bull's head. Note that the ear and right eye of the bull are correctly positioned, as are the left eye and the ear of the horse. When asked about the identity of the bull, Picasso said, "The bull is brutality and darkness." Who was the leader of brutality and darkness in Picasso's time? It was clearly General Franco, whose large forehead has some resemblance to the Guernica bull. Picasso is using less than subtle caricatures and metaphors in his Guernica. As we move down the viewer's left side of the panel, we see a wailing woman who holds a so-called dead child with unusually short legs. The face looks older than that of a child and suggests Benito Mussolini with a piggish nose. My read of the dead child is that the short legs are a vertically trimmed mustache and that the triangle above it represents a wide nose. The fingernails above the wide nose are the eyes. The head of the dead child is that of Mussolini, and the body is a caricature of someone else. I believe that the bull metaphorically represents General Franco, who started the Spanish Civil War, and that the face of the dead child is his sidekick, Italy's Benito Mussolini, along with the wide-nosed man with the narrow mustache on the dead child, who likely represents a German whose name Picasso would not have wanted stated. This side of Guernica portrays the fascists, or far right. The central horse would then represent the Spanish people, which Picasso confirmed. For this political theory to be correct, there must be a far-left communist influence. We will return to this idea shortly. Picasso chose not to dignify any of these fascist monsters in his painting by name. He also stated that his painting would never be hung in Spain as long as Franco was alive. Picasso also never forgot the role of the German war machine in the destruction of the civilian town of Guernica. A few years later, during the Nazi occupation of Paris, Picasso was asked by a German soldier who had seen postcards of his painting Guernica, "Did you do this?" The witty yet cautious Spanish artist responded, "No, you did. Go on, take one, a souvenir." Guernica speaks to the tragedies of war and the suffering it inflicts upon innocent civilians. Under the shadow of Picasso's great canvas, there is hope for peace. We now turn to the so-called fallen hero on the bottom of the image, who lays supine with a broken sword and outstretched left arm. One could ask if he is deceased or is laying down. Look to his eyes. They are open and peering in different directions. This is not a battle injury. Picasso may be projecting different perspectives. Let us turn to this gallery of disc image in the Spanish cave of El Castillo from 34,000 years ago to better understand perspectives. The panel is about 10 meters wide, and each red disc is on average the size of the palm of your hand. A red-haired hero is supine across the panel, or so it seems. Maybe this is only from the perspective when he is being pawed by a lion. Our hero prevails when you turn him 90 degrees, as evidenced by his trophy lion pelt. As do some of the greatest heroes and villains of them all, as depicted in the constellations Orion and Taurus, the bull, who battle through the night sky. This battle that never was, but always will be. Such Upper Paleolithic images and this astronomical view may have been consciously or unconsciously been Picasso's source for both his pictured hero and bull. Guernica may be about all wars, with real and imagined heroes and villains, some of which are created as pareidolia by the human mind. There appears to be another embedded image at the bottom of the panel in the hand of the fallen warrior. I believe that the hand of the hero is a head of a dog. See the upward ears and the large nose. The current popular opinion is that the hero's hand was inspired by this glove. They don't look the same to me. Why might Picasso have depicted a dog for the hand? Was he seeking the strong-jawed grasp of a dog? We may learn more about the idea of a dog hand at Gorham's Cave in Gibraltar. Here we find this panel dating to about 36,000 years ago that is about the size of 2 A4 pieces of paper. On the top of this panel, we find engraved dogs. The image to the viewer's left has them outlined. The two larger canids are about the size of your thumb. These engraved canids most closely resemble the Majorca shepherd dog that is indigenous to the Balearic Islands of Spain. The dogs in the Gorham etching are on the hand of this odd, monstrous character. They give him the strong-jawed grasp of dogs. As unusual as this is, the character also transforms between a man, ostrich, and Therianthropes, that is, the mix between man and another animal being. The Giza Sphinx with its lion head is another example of Therianthropes. Coincidentally, the path to better understand these and Upper Paleolithic characters led me to Picasso's Guernica. Transformation is common in art, mythology, and literature. as is the idea of man taking on the strength of another animal being through Therianthropy. This idea extends back deep from the Upper Paleolithic to modern movies, and may partly explain how the fallen hero came to have the strong-jawed grasp of a dog. As suggested earlier, if there is a fascist far right portrayed on Guernica, then there must also be a communist far left. Let's look at the woman on the viewer's right with her hands raised. The screaming woman closely resembles Picasso's estranged Russian wife Olga, who was formerly a ballerina. Note the distinctive chins on the two characters. Both are portrayed with theatrical stances. The Guernica woman screams from what appears to be a barrel or a burning structure. Maybe there can be another perspective. Let us take a closer look. I believe it's an embedded brown bear with an outstretched arm. See the toes at the end? That would then be the Russian bear, the Soviet communists, who fanned the flames of the conflict, represented on the far left of the painting. With the fascists on the far right, the Soviet communists on the far left, and the central horse in the crossfire representing the Spanish people, we can see the political struggle of Europe in this image. Not just the Spanish Civil War, but the many worldwide political conflicts between the two extremes. Through Guernica, Picasso asks us at what cost on the people should the ideologies of extremists be entertained. This is a question we grapple with in our present time. Here in our eastern suburb of Portland last summer, we were besieged by tear gas to the left of us and raging wildfires on the right. This was the mirrored vision Picasso would have found from the roof of his Paris flat shortly after dusk, the night following the attack on the civilian town of Guernica. The Spanish artist might have looked towards the town of Guernica to see any bomb flashes. Yet the distance would have been too far. Picasso would have seen the constellations Orion and Taurus on one side of the night sky, and Ursa Major as the Russian bear on the other. The night sky and Guernica are in mirror of one another. This was Picasso's cosmos in that time and place. Remember our red-haired hero from the Gallery of Discs? He is the constellation Orion. There are about 20 other identifiable Greek constellations on this Ice Age panel. As is our hero depicted in Gorham's Cave, the bright star Sirius is designated behind both Orion characters. Sirius is an actual star on the flank of the dog at his rear. We must remember that the fault for the war crimes of Guernica and the rest of our societal disgraces and triumphs are not in our stars. Picasso was not an astrologer, nor am I. Constellations are a projection of the human psyche into the cosmos. Picasso lived under dark night skies, when people projected their psyche into the cosmos through constellations, as artists did tens of thousands of years before his time. Picasso may have been familiar with the Baroque artist Dan Ceder's painting, Diana next to the corpse of Orion. This tragic Greek character is the fallen hero before taking the stairway to heaven among the stars by the goddess Diana, who is depicted hovering on a cloud. The reorientation of the fallen hero, adding the central horse, the brown bear, the second light, the dog hand, and the superimposed horse, as well as characterizing the dead child, all happened in that missing week from Picasso's life. In that week, Picasso not only changed Guernica, but also how he viewed humanity in a cosmos, where a fallen hero eternally rises to fight the faces of evil. In the words of King Solomon, what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. This may be true under more distant suns in the night sky. Let us briefly consider a few other Picasso paintings to further explore these ideas of personal transformation and embedded characters, and possibly come to a better understanding of the perceived madness that we call modern art. Here in Picasso's The Sculptor, we have what appears to be two separate faces on the viewer's right that hint of a Janus figure. Are they one or two personalities? Remember that dual personalities and human transformation don't always need to be between man and animals. We have a shadow side on the big screen and in the theater of our lives. What if an artist painted two personalities or transformational perspectives on top of the same head, just as we found with the fallen hero? We can get a sense of the character's dual feelings through Picasso's projection in The Sailor. Picasso's The Yellow Sweater shows two personalities of the same individual through their eyes and hands. Picasso's work has often been considered to be insane. Perhaps one person's insanity is another person's genius. Here we see two faces on Picasso's seated nude in an armchair. The light blue in profile and the larger face use both eyes. The depiction of multiple personas on a single being is an Upper Paleolithic art form. Picasso was an armchair psychologist of sorts, and without doubt depicted the transformation of personas in his art. He was also reflective of the human artistic experience. Picasso said, "It is not sufficient to know an artist's work. It is also necessary to know when he did them, why, how, and under what circumstances. Someday, there will undoubtedly be a science. It may be called the science of man, which will seek to learn more about man in general through the study of creative man. I often think about such a science, and I want to leave to posterity a documentation that will be as complete as possible. That's why I put a date on everything I do." Picasso blended the science of man through his works. In the Spanish artist's own words, "To me, there is no past or future in my art. If a work of art cannot live always in the present, it must not be considered at all. The art of the Greeks, of the Egyptians, of the great painters who lived in other times, is not an art of the past. Perhaps it is more alive today than it ever was." This returns us to Altamira and Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, Picasso's first work of modern art that changed how we viewed painting, drawing, sculptures from thereafter. That science of man, which merged the distant past to the present with transformational masks, those masks that hid the faces Picasso never wanted the world to see. And with all the secrets that Picasso carried with him in life, what might have been his final thoughts? What feelings did he take with him in that very end? What did those eyes that stared to the camera see when faced with his own mortal death? Our answers may lie in the body of work the Spaniard produced. That eternal memory of man's visions embedded and recognized in our unconscious through the great mysteries. My name is Bernie Taylor. More on my work can be found on my webpage, beforeorion.com, and these social media sites.